Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Zonta International for this conversation on child marriage. It is my pleasure to introduce Zonta International President, Sharon Langenbeck. Sharon?
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first advocacy webinar series for the 2020-2022 biennium. Zonta works to achieve gender equality through service and advocacy, so I am so excited to have this advocacy webinar series. These webinars will occur about once a quarter with topics that align with our mission, just like today's topic of ending child marriage. Other topics in the series include human trafficking, gender-based violence, and women's role and the impact of climate change, along with a few others. Ending child marriage is one of our international service projects this biennium. We know that COVID-19 has been a setback for gender equality and has put girls at an increased risk of early marriage. Not being able to attend school and continue their education has been a significant impact for girls. Today, you will learn more about the successes and challenges of preventing early marriage. I want to thank Advocacy Chairman Teresa Lin and Assistant Executive Director Megan for organizing this webinar. Also, thank you to our speakers today for sharing their knowledge, experience, and advice. Our work continues for gender equality. Teresa.
Thank you, President Sharon. Thank you for the opening remarks and the brief introduction. I am Teresa Lin, the chairman of International Advocacy Committee and your moderator today for our 4 speakers. Later on, I will introduce the speakers. But before that, I hope to have just a few words on the achievements that what we really want to achieve today and for the upcoming webinars in future. We feel that a lot of people may say, for example, like today's topic, end child marriage, oh, we know already, right? We know the pain that we will bring to the children and the pros and cons, but we hope to bring this to a more serious light. We hope to deepen up our analysis rather than just touching on the superficial in each of the webinars, this one and in future ones, the causes, what causes the pain, what causes the women inequality situation to persist, and then attempt to find solutions or at least discuss the successes and challenges so that we can share with our clubs worldwide their success factors and also their challenges. I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of things in common, and that perhaps is the reason why so many participants signed up for today. So I really look forward to hearing from our speakers, 4 very accomplished ladies. The first speaker is Freddie Riss, who is the founder of Unchained at Last. Now, Freddie had a very unpleasant experience when she was young. She was actually the survivor from child marriage. She was married to a man by her family at 19, and that man turned out to be a violent person. And that she probably would tell you later, or on the struggle that she has so that she can attain an university education at the age of 27, and then subsequently graduated at the age of 32 from a university, the first in her family to get a college education. And for this, I really salute you for this, Freddie. And then later on, because of her journalism degree, she joined as a reporter for the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey. And then later on as an investigator at Crow, the world's largest investigation firm. And because most of the women and girls who want to flee or resist an arranged marriage had difficulties in finances or religious law and social customs in order to free from all of these. And Freddie founded a Unchained at Last, all right, in order that they can get help when needed. She is being recognized internationally and in the US as an expert on forced child marriage. Now, our second speaker is Donna Pollard, right? Donna successfully advocated for improved legislation in her home state in Kentucky. She is an active Sonson and also a survivor. And she will be able to share with us a lot of her experiences. And through the experience, then she would really wants to put an end to child marriage through the parental consent and continues to advocate for this practice change both nationally and internationally. As a survivor herself, she founded Survivor's Corner, a nonprofit that empowers those ready to share their survival experiences with the goal of breaking abusive cycles. And Donna has often been interviewed by the press, a lot of media. So I'm very happy to have Donna joining us today. The third speaker is Mariha Zaman Khan. Mariha is a partner of Ayat Legal Services in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and a co-founder of I Know Right. Mariha is a barrister by qualification and also an advocate of Bangladesh by profession. After completing her bar course from Lincoln Inn City University, London, she returned to Bangladesh for her law practice and also lecture as the principal tutor at London College of Legal Studies South in Bangladesh, and is the co-founder of the organization I Know Right, dedicated in spreading legal knowledge and providing legal advices, focus on advocating against domestic violence, abuse, child marriage, and also gender-based violence. Mariha is also an avid contributor, writing at many national dailies in Bangladesh. And she will definitely tell us about the Asian experience, especially in Bangladesh. So thank you for joining us. Nankali Maksud is the fourth speaker, and she is currently the senior advisor for Harmful Practices UNICEF, coordinator of a global program to end child marriage. Nankali brings with her a lot of experiences on child marriage practices, as been working in UNICEF, and also on child protection in the past in Malawi, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, and also in Somalia, focusing also on the realization of the rights of vulnerable children. So we are very happy to have these four speakers with us. They will give us more or less a world perspective, all right, in Africa, in US, in Bangladesh, and so basically, you know, I really look forward to all of your speeches. So shall we start with our first speaker, Freddie? Freddie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you all for being a part of this conversation. And it's such an honor to share this stage with such accomplished women. As you heard, I'm Freddie Reese. I am the founder and executive director of Unchained at Last, which is the only organization dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the United States through both direct services and advocacy. And as you heard, I founded the organization out of my own traumatic experience. I myself am a forced marriage survivor. When I first founded Unchained at Last in 2011, the mission was specifically direct services. We were dedicated solely to helping individuals in the US or from the US to escape forced marriage, whether that's being planned for them or they were already in the marriage. And yet, more and more girls under the age of 18 were reaching out to us at Unchained to ask for the same help that we were providing to adults. And that's how we realized that in about 2015, that the United States has a serious child marriage problem. And that's why, even though we're a tiny team, we decided that in our spare time, we would take on this little project of ending child marriage in the United States. So just to explain how serious of a problem child marriage is in the United States. Child marriage or marriage before 18 remains legal in most of the United States, as I will explain soon, and it is happening at an alarming rate. In fact, at Unchained at Last, just last month, we completed a study that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it was done in partnership with McGill University, the investigative firms QRI and Kroll, and a statistics firm, quantitative analysis. And what we discovered was shocking. Between 2000 and 2018, nearly 300,000 children were married in the United States. A few of them were as young as 10 years old, because marriage as young as 10 has been legal in most of the United States for a long time and remains legal still in many US states. And here's another really shocking point that we found. 78% of the children who married in the United States during that period were girls married to adult men, an average of 4 years older. Also really upsetting. More than 60,000 marriages since 2000 in the United States occurred at an age or with a spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. And I'll talk more about that soon. But here, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because I think everyone here agrees that we need to end child marriage, but I want to focus on, I think it's still important to reiterate why that's so important. Child marriage doesn't just sound bad. Here are the three main reasons that we at Unchained are determined to eliminate child marriage or marriage before the age of 18 completely, no exceptions. One is that child marriage can so easily be forced. And the reason for that is that in no US state does a child get the rights of adulthood before the age of 18. The age of adulthood is 18 in almost every state, and in 3 states it's actually higher. And until the day a girl or a boy turns 18 and gets the rights of adulthood, the basic steps that they would take, that we would help them as advocates at Unchained at Last to take to prevent a forced marriage or to get out of one, almost impossible. Something as basic as leaving home, for example. That's the first thing that we help survivors to do. If you are not 18 in the United States, if you leave home to escape from an impending forced marriage or to get away from an abusive spouse in a lot of states, you are considered a runaway. The police can drag you back home against your will. We as advocates, if we try to help somebody in that situation, in many states, we could be charged criminally for trying to help. Besides, where would they go? Domestic violence shelters across the United States typically will not take in minors before the age of 18 because of the liability issues they bring, because often they have funding guidelines that prevent them from doing that. They cannot easily retain an attorney to help them figure out all of this, because contracts with children, including retainer agreements, are typically voidable. And then perhaps most shockingly, children typically are not allowed to bring a legal action in their own name until the day they turn 18, which means not only can they typically not seek a protective order against an abusive spouse, but they also in many states are not even allowed to file for divorce. So what we are doing here is creating a nightmarish legal trap for girls. And I say girls because, as I said, most of the children who marry in the US are girls. And what we have found is that when girls reach out to us for help and they find out how limited their options are, many of them turn to suicide attempts because death actually seems like the only way out for them. Second really important reason to end marriage before 18 is the devastating lifelong repercussions that it produces. Whether or not it was a forced marriage, we know that girls and women in the United States, similar to around the world, if they marry before the age of 18, they face devastating health consequences, much more likely to drop out of high school, never to complete their university education, and much more likely to end up living in poverty, and like women around the world, much more likely to experience domestic violence within that marriage. And then there's also the third problem, the third main reason to end child marriage. We're undermining our statutory rape laws. Why bother having statutory rape laws if we're going to undermine that through marriage? I talked about how 60,000 marriages since 2000 in the United States occurred at an age or a spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. In 88% of those, that sex within that marriage became legal under state law that specifically allows within marriage what would otherwise be considered statutory rape. So we've all like to shake our finger at countries where if a rapist marries his victim, she's no longer his victim, she's his wife, and he won't be prosecuted. United States is one of those countries. In 88% of these cases, the marriage license was a get out of jail free card for a child rapist. And in the other 12% of cases, the marriage was legal, but sex within that marriage was still a crime. And imagine that in those situations, every time the state handed out a marriage license, it was sending a child home literally to be raped and making a complete mockery of our statutory rape laws. Here's the important thing. All 300,000 children married recently in the United States were married legally. The problem here in the United States, unlike in some of the other countries you'll hear about, is the laws themselves allowing this. And the good news with that is that that means that there is a simple legislative solution. Most states already said 18 is the marriage age. What we need to do is every state needs to eliminate the legal loopholes that right now allow marriage before 18. In many states, as young as 0, marriage is still allowed. We need to eliminate those loopholes. We're talking about simple legislation that harms no one. It costs nothing, and it ends a human rights abuse. The US State Department calls marriage before 18 a human rights abuse. Now, we at Unchained at Last and our allies have been pushing for every state to pass this legislation since 2015. And at first, we thought that every legislator was going to give us a hug and a high five because it's so obvious, it's so common sense and simple. Why would you not do this? And we were shocked that in state after state, legislators looked at this legislation and said, no. They either watered it down or rejected it. And the reason that they gave, the number one reason that legislators gave is, you know, I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. Just if a girl gets pregnant, she has no choice but to marry, even if she was raped. Well, we pushed back at Unchained at Last. So we started writing op-ed articles and in the New York Times and the Washington Post and any other paper that will have us, and dozens of media interviews. I gave a TEDx talk. I don't know if any of you have seen the film Knots. It's a beautiful film that just came out about forced and child marriage in the United States. We invented the chain-in. It's a form of protest where we all gather and we wear bridal gowns and veils and we chain our wrists and tape our mouths to show the world this is what you're doing when you force somebody to marry. We started email campaigns and coalitions, and we found really powerful allies like Zonta. We were so proud and relieved when Zonta took this on as an issue, child marriage in the United States, also UNICEF USA. Now, at first, we were pushing for years and getting nowhere, and we thought this was never going to happen. And in a moment of frustration, all of us at Unchained at Last promised that when the first US state took the drastic step of ending child marriage, we would all get tattoos to commemorate the victory. And I want to show you my tattoo because in 2018, it's a broken chain tattoo, if you can see it. And in 2018, Delaware became the first US state to end child marriage. The hashtag is 18, no exceptions. And after that, New Jersey, American Samoa, US Virgin Islands, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, all ended child marriage. And there's now legislation pending in 11 states. 2 of those, New York and Rhode Island, look very promising. Just last week, the Senate in both of those states passed legislation to end marriage before 18. It's pending in the lower house in both of those states. And in Rhode Island, the House is expected to vote on it actually on Wednesday and is expected to pass with overwhelming, if not unanimous support. And we're very hopeful that the governor will sign it. And then we'll have 1 more state that has ended child marriage. But so far we have 4 states down. And as I like to say, only 46 to go in the push to end child marriage in the United States. Now, child marriage is unlike other social injustices, where we all agree they're awful, but there's no simple solution. When we're talking about child marriage in the United States, there's such a simple solution. We can not only end this sexist, despicable, archaic practice in our lifetime, we can do it this year. If we all put our minds to it and we stay focused and keep the pressure on legislators to do the right thing and set the marriage age as 18, no exceptions. And I have no doubt that we will win this war, and soon, now that we have the power of Zonta on our side. And I want to thank all of you for joining us in this fight. 18, no exceptions.
Thank you. Thank you, Freddie, for sharing with us. And you have been very successful in getting a lot of the states to pass the law, but much work is needed. Seems that there's still quite a number. Okay, so Donna, your turn.
Great, thank you all so much. Thank you, Teresa and Freddie. That was incredibly powerful. I always enjoy hearing you share about the great work that Unchained is doing and appreciate your advocacy and your allyship. And, I'll share with you all that so many of the statistics that Frady just mentioned are very relatable to my own personal experience, from where she talks about the inability to access protections. As you'll learn further into my story, I was turned away from a domestic violence shelter because I was not yet 18. So, these are just some of the reasons that it's so critical that we focus on ending child marriage and make sure that, in that process, we are reaching those that are facing forced and child marriages and really rallying behind them if they've already survived as well, from a supportive and trauma-informed manner, so that we're not creating additional harm in the process of that advocacy. Now, I will warn you that what I'm going to share with you is going to be uncomfortable. It will be challenging for me to share my personal experiences, even though I've been doing this since 2016. It's always challenging because it is very personal. And it's also going to be likely that it will be challenging for you to hear as well, as so much of my story highlights a disconnect in the systems that are supposed to protect children. But more importantly than this discomfort to me is the recognition of opportunity to bring those meaningful legislative reforms, as well as to highlight that power of resilience and hope that we can carry to advance our communities forward. And so I'll share with you that I grew up in an abusive household, and when I was 13 years old, my father died from lung cancer. The abuse and his illness and death were too much for my young self to be able to handle, and I ended up being admitted to Charter Behavioral Health in Indiana when I was just 14. It was a way for my mother to wash her hands of me, as she used to say so often when I was a child. But instead of receiving the treatment and coping skills to deal with the trauma that I had suffered, my vulnerability there was preyed upon by a 29-year-old mental health technician that worked at the facility. Again, I was just 14. My mother allowed us to have a dating relationship when I was released from Charter, and our relationship became sexual very quickly. I ended up living in London, Kentucky when I was discharged from Charter, and this man lived in Jeffersonville, Indiana. We would still see each other nearly every weekend, though, because either my mother would drive me up to meet him or he would drive down to be with me. And when he was pulled over once for a burnt out headlight, the police didn't question why a 15-year-old girl was in the car with him. And neither did any of the hotel staff, where I was taken by my mother and left alone with him for hours at a time. Just after I turned 16, my mother consented to me marrying him. He was nearly 31. I was still a resident of Kentucky at that time, and he had driven down from Indiana to take me to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, where he thought we could get married without question, since it's a spot that's known for quick weddings. And he was right. And in fact, that was the first time that I started having this light bulb go off and, felt like I recognized something bad was about to happen. The clerk did not even look up from the computer when she asked which one is the minor. It was so cold and transactional. And again, really highlights the fact that with these laws on the books, it's very void of the humanity that these children experience when they're forced into an underage marriage. I ended up having to drop out of school before I completed the 10th grade because of the marriage. The day after the wedding, he took me to his new apartment in Clarksville, Indiana, and I tried to enroll in Clarksville High School, which was just up the street from the apartment complex that we lived in, but the assistant principal would not allow me to enroll at the school. She said that I would become pregnant quickly and that they could not have that at their school. And so I ended up having to begin working full-time at 16 years of age to provide for my then 31-year-old husband, who would spend his days getting high and drunk. And even though I tried to escape at both 16 and 17, I was refused housing by 2 different apartment complexes because I could not enter into a contract as a minor. And again, I was even refused refuge in a domestic violence shelter because I was not yet of legal age. So we currently have these laws on the books that allow children to be married, but we don't have the protections in place because once a child marriage occurs, we fall into such a gray area legally. And those who I would have expected to be able to turn to for protection also did not help. The police did not feel it was necessary to investigate further when the neighbors called because of the fighting in our home. And in fact, they would speak to my abuser, who manipulated them into thinking that I had emotional issues that he was trying to help me work through. I had no credibility. When I was 16, I became pregnant for the first time. My doctor didn't question the fact that my spouse was nearly 15 years older than me. And when I miscarried, they performed a section D&C at Clark Memorial Hospital, but it did not remove all of the placenta. I could have died 2 weeks later because I spiked a high fever from the toxins that the placenta was releasing in my body. And it took me 2 full days before I could convince my abuser to take me to the hospital and consent to me having medical care. I became pregnant again when I was 17. My daughter was born just about a month after I turned 18, and I spent my 18th birthday heavily pregnant, taken to a strip club by my abuser for his own gratification. Shortly after I gave birth, I was made to begin working there. Again, I had no credibility, and he was making sure of it. My final breaking point came when one day he was pressuring me to do something that I felt horribly uncomfortable with, and I stood my ground and said no. He then proceeded to choke me as my daughter, who was a baby at the time, saw him and laughed because in her innocent mind, we were playing. She didn't recognize that as violent, of course. And I knew in that moment that I had to get out for my own sake and hers, but I was in no position to take care of a baby when I was still a child myself, at this point living in public housing in New Albany, Indiana. So the judge awarded custody to my abuser, who was a college graduate in his 30s. And the court also awarded him child support to be paid by me to him. At this point, a 20-year-old high school dropout, barely making above minimum wage. Let me be clear. The institutions and legal system of Indiana failed both me and my child on multiple occasions. The systems in Kentucky and Tennessee did as well. And though each of these seemingly insurmountable obstacles I've encountered would have been enough to destroy many, it has not and it will not silence me. Because what do I do when my credibility, my education, my body, my child, my income has been ripped away from me and given to my abuser, who's been able to hide his offenses behind a marriage license? The only option for me was to begin to fight to end child marriage by using my story across our nation and refuse to let this happen to another child. Despite the violence, the exploitation, the economic disadvantages, this perceived lack of credibility, I refused to hang my head in fear or shame any longer, because I believe that the reason that I survived all of these things is to use my experiences to protect other girls from being trapped in a life like I was, and to show my oldest daughter, even if from afar, that I have taken a horrible situation and done the best I could to make it right for others. And just to wrap up quickly, I have gone on to earn my bachelor's degree in business administration, and I graduated summa cum laude. I founded the nonprofit Survivors Corner that Teresa mentioned earlier to provide that supportive network for trauma survivors looking to make social justice changes in a trauma-informed manner. I also travel frequently as an advocate, giving testimony before legislative committees and as a keynote speaker, both nationally and internationally. And this determination that I was able to uncover within myself after identifying my resilience did lead to Kentucky passing Senate Bill 48 in 2018 that did put an end to child marriage through parental consent. It's not a perfect reform. It's not our preferred state, but making progress to me was something that we could achieve in the moment. And I share these things not to be self-celebrating to you, but to demonstrate the resiliency that comes from giving pain a purpose. And so through partnerships with Zonta International, through having such accomplished women leaders and really empowering survivors of this atrocity to share their experiences and their stories, I absolutely believe that we can continue this fight to end child marriage. and again, stop predators from being able to hide their offenses behind a marriage license. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I commend you for your courage and coming out and really speak up. And it is important because you are a survivor and your experience matters and casts a deeper opinion to every one of us. That means you actually give us encouragement so that we can work harder on the matter of ending child marriage. Thank you. Now, our third speaker is Mariha from Bangladesh. Mariha, can I have you, on the...
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. A very good evening from Bangladesh to everyone. Thank you very much for making me a part of this. And today I'm going to speak about ending child marriage from the Bangladesh perspective and moreover the South Asian perspective as well. I would request Megan to switch the slide as I speak of. I've just prepared a slide to make it easier for everyone to understand what I'm going to discuss throughout the session today. I would start off with giving a legal definition since I'm a lawyer, as has been already introduced by Teresa herself. And I work for gender-based violence and against domestic abuse. And of course, and I'm an advocate for ending child marriage in Bangladesh as well. So there are a few things that about law that I feel that needs to be communicated to all the participants who are present here today so that they can get a better view of how the child marriage rate in Bangladesh, which has already reduced since 1970 from above 90% to 51% can be reduced further. So Teresa, so Megan, if you may switch the slide to the next one. Thank you very much. So just to inform everyone, although the rate for child marriages has reduced, as I have mentioned, since the 1970s from over 90% to 51% in Bangladesh, still Bangladesh ranks to be the 8th country in the world with the highest rate of child marriages going on. And we are the #1 in South Asia. And the question comes up that why are we still struggling to curb this menace which is still there in the society? All the laws have been formulated, and most importantly, the law that is in operation as of now is the Child Marriage Restraint Act 2017, which has overruled the 1929 Act. It defines a minor, or in terms of child marriage, a marriage to be between any parties or both the parties where minors are defined under this act. Under this act, the minors have been defined just like the US, any girl who is below the age of 18, and for males, it is below the age of 21. Now the question comes up that are these laws effective enough? The idea is that just to let everyone know that in Bangladesh, till now, underage marriages or getting girls married off below the age of 18 is not considered to be a taboo, either religiously or even culturally. And the main reason behind it is because many people believe that since Bangladesh is still a developing country where most of the people are living below the poverty level, they feel that if they get their daughters married off, then it is better for the family since the daughter will be then taken care of by the husband. However, what happens, as we have seen, if you may please change the slide, what we have seen is that there are not enough laws protecting these girls. And even if there are laws, they are not enough or strong enough to be efficiently enforced. And most importantly, these girls end up being subjected to violence, and also they are subjected to marital rape. Now this, as Freddie and Donna both have mentioned earlier, marital rape in Bangladesh is still not considered to be a crime. And there are many reasons for it. Although there have been a lot of write-ups and people are advocating throughout the country that now time has come to put marital rape as a law in the country, since we follow the law of the Commonwealth countries. And in the UK, marital rape has been recognized to be in operation since 1991. Still in 2021, in Bangladesh, we are yet from achieving this target. So marital rape is happening. These girls who are getting married off at a very early age, they are not being able to pursue their education. There is a very high rate of dropouts from the schools because these girls have to look after their children because they get pregnant very early. If you may please change the slide. They get pregnant very early. There is a higher number of maternal mortality. forced sexual relationships because of inequality in the society, greater vulnerability due to sexually transmitted infections being transferred to these women. All of these are leading to a crippling economy because these girls are not getting educated, they are remaining unskilled, and rather they are remaining dependent on their husbands and later on their sons throughout their lives. So the question comes up that, is the law doing enough? The law is there in place, of course. The law is there allowing these government individuals to file complaints at the court, to take the actions that are necessary in order to ensure that these child marriages are not taking place within the vicinity, within the rural areas in Bangladesh, and even in the cities. However, the problem comes up that many of these people, the only way through which you can determine the age of marriage in Bangladesh is through their birth certificates or through their education qualification. The birth certificates in Bangladesh, unfortunately, they are not easily available because many of them are having their children at home. They do not think it to be necessary to go out to the local government office to get the birth certificate, for which even if these girls are underage, they carry off with the marriage saying that this girl is 18, and or they say that they're going to finish off with the formalities later on. All the laws have been in place and there are punishments. Can you please change the slide? Thank you. There are punishments which are, putting parents into prison if necessary, if they force their child to get marriage, and also, putting in punishments for the marriage registrars. But still, it has been seen to be ineffective, especially during the pandemic, where because of the poverty being infused by the pandemic itself, a lot of these girls are being married off without any formal procedure, but within the closed rooms, in order to ensure that no one knows, and these families who are not being able to afford the education and the raising up of their children, they can get off with them. This is something which is extremely unfortunate, and this is something which has been going on. And for that, another reason is that, as I have mentioned earlier, that the law itself, there are a few changes that are required to be made within the law itself, because there is a legal inconsistency. The law states that 18 is the age within which, under which no one can get married. And I want to praise Freddie for achieving this in Delaware, because it has been an excellent initiative, which we unfortunately have failed so far to achieve in Bangladesh or even in South Asia. Because in our religious perspective, and particularly if I have to mention, according to the Muslim law, you can get a girl married even if, once they have had their period. And that can be even at the age of 9 to 11. Although, the NGOs, the non-government organizations, they have been working with the government, in collaboration with the government, and going for rampant advocacies and campaigns to ensure that this does not happen. But still, there are incidents which have been reported, and there are incidents which have come into our attention. And once these girls are married off, these girls do not get enough shelter where they can go in order to complain that they no longer want to stay within the marriage. Even if their husbands are abusive, the annulment process of the marriage itself is seen to be so cumbersome that they need to go to a lawyer. And this whole hassle of going to a lawyer, because they do not get legal aid, unfortunately, here in Bangladesh for annulment of a marriage, it appears that there is a higher suicidal rate, because these girls either succumb to suicide. They believe that there is no point of living, because they cannot share what they are feeling. And secondly, they do not have a person that they can confide in, who will be their savior and help them out. However, having said all this, can we move to the next slide, please? Having said all this, the last point that I would want to mention before I move to the success stories, because of course there are success stories for which the number has reduced. The main problem, which I believe, personally believe, has been the section 19 of the Child Marriage Restraint Act, which does not give any provision, which allows a special circumstance to the parents and the guardians of a minor to give the permission, if they feel, for a child to get married, which let me again focus on, is also a breach of a fundamental human right. The Bangladesh is a part of, is a signatory to a lot of treaties. They are part of the UNCRC, which actually advocates in favor of non-discrimination. But again, marrying of a minor without their consent and the law itself allowing such a thing to go on is something which I believe is actually taking us a step back in formulating, in reducing the number of child marriages that is taking place, particularly in Bangladesh. If we may please move to the next slide. However, as I have mentioned, the number has reduced over the years. In the 1970s, it was more than 90%. Now we have come down to 51%. Still, the government has an initiative. It has devised a national plan for ending child marriage, which we hope to attain by 2041. Unfortunately, still 20 years to go, so that we can have, we could eliminate child marriages completely in Bangladesh. The UNICEF, in collaboration with the government, has introduced helplines. To be particular, 1098 is the number. Children, daughters, girls in any area, minors who feel that they do not want to get married. Because now, because of the advancement of technology, they are much more better in terms of knowing about these helplines. They can call these helplines, and there are officers in our rural offices who come up to help these people. And this is where I want to pitch the idea of what I know, right? My foundation has been doing so far. So during the pandemic, we have received at least 150 in 3 months. This is a statistic that I'm sharing within 3 months. 150 messages in 3 months time since Bangladesh went on for a lockdown regarding complaints about these girls, about minors reaching out to us that their parents want to marry them off. So there was this particular situation. For confidential reasons, I'm not being able to share the name. So this girl reached out to us. She was 16 years old. She had 3 other siblings who were younger than her. Her parents wanted to marry her off. Their parents were separated, and it was also getting very difficult. She used to live with her mother. It was getting very difficult for the family to bear the expenses and the cost of her education. And she wanted us to somehow do something in order to stop the marriage in the middle of a pandemic. We tried to reach out to the parents, but as the conservative idea goes by, they did not respond to us as we have expected. They did not want to even speak to us, but we were adamant as a team. We just requested that, you know what, let us just sit, if possible, through a virtual teleconference. It does not need to be Zoom, because in Bangladesh, you see that everyone does not have a Zoom. Although we all somewhat have smartphones, but everyone is not well acquainted with the idea of virtual meetings. Once the situation improved a bit, we went up. We invited the parents to come over to our office to have a cup of tea, of course, maintaining social distancing. And then we explained to them the repercussions of getting their girl married off at such a young age. And at the same time, we highlighted the benefits that if they educate their girl, if they give her the choice that what she wants to do and whether she wants to get married off with someone who is 15 years older to her, then this is something that is going to be beneficial not only for the family and herself, but for the whole upcoming generations to come. Because once she is skilled, once she is educated, she will no longer be considered as a burden, but she will be able to help the family as well. Fortunately, the parents somehow got convinced by us, although we were not too optimistic, seeing the situation, how it was going. And the good news is now she is enrolled at her school. She's finishing her school online, and we connected her with another NGO who has provided her with a laptop so that she can continue her online education. And this is one very small example, which I believe that how consultation and if you are very determined, you can actually stop these child marriages from taking place. And in Bangladesh perspective, since religion, culture, everything comes in the way, this is one of the factors I believe that needs to be advocated very much in the society in order to ensure that we can cut down the rates of child marriages as much as possible. Can we please move to the next slide? We can move to the other one. Can we move to the next one, please? Yes. So coming to the conclusion, what can be done? Although the pandemic is here to stay, I believe, because we are still yet to recover. We are going through our second wave and things are not going as good as it should be. Still, I believe that once situation improves, there should be greater number of workshops to educate the parents and the girls about the problems of child marriages, because a lot of them still do not know that how harmful it is. I also believe that there should be grassroots campaigns against child marriages at all districts in Bangladesh. It should be developed as a taboo, because here you see that unless and until it is developed as a taboo that if you get your girl married off below the age of 18, this is something that is shunned off by the society. Until that is done, I believe that people will stop from actually thinking and taking it very easily. Finally, I believe that there should be greater victim support centers, which I believe is lacking right now. There should be legal aid provisions. And most importantly, there should be a reform in the law itself. And there should the special provision, which which I have just shown you, should be more specific in regards to the legal age for marriage. It should be one fixed and should not vary from the religious perspective or from the cultural perspective or from the legal perspective. And most importantly, I also feel that throughout this process, marital rape should also be recognized as an offense in Bangladesh. Once we are able to do all this, and once the infection rates reduces in Bangladesh, I believe that another very important task that the government should be doing is to reopen the schools, if possible, at the open fields, because these girls, if they start going to school, they will be empowered. And the government, just to inform everyone, they started a campaign right after the 1980s of providing cash to the families who send their girls to school in order to encourage girls from being sent to school. That has stopped during the pandemic because girls are no longer going to school. So I feel that this should also again be revived in order to have better empowered, informed women, so that we do not need to have such advocacies perhaps after next 10 years, because it will be completely eradicated from all spectrum, from all societies, be it in the US, be it in Africa, be it in South America, or be it in Bangladesh and in the South Asian perspective. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening out to me and for hearing me out. And I hope that this whole webinar is really fruitful for all of us to achieve our goal of reducing child marriage and eradicating it completely from the society. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mariha. I think we need more lawyers like yourself who are dedicated to understand the law and then all the loopholes so that these children get protected. The last but not least is our fourth speaker, Nankali Maksud, as a Senior Advisor of Harmful Practices UNICEF. So Nankali.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Right, brilliant. Really grateful to have the opportunity to be able to speak to the Zonta family. I've had the opportunity of speaking to you quite a few times about the global program to end child marriage. But this is an opportunity to provide an update on, since we last saw each other, on what's going on with the global program. Next slide, please. So before we get into the specific details of what the global program is doing, I'd just like to be able to set the stage in terms of what is it that's going on globally in terms of child marriage. Our situation today is that 25 million child marriages have been prevented in the last decade. And I want to say that because I think as advocates who are working within the world of child marriage, and for many years, many of us, many decades, it's important for us to know that the hard work that we've been doing is actually yielding some results. So today where we stand is that we have managed to prevent 25 million child marriage. And for that, I think we should stop and be able to congratulate ourselves. But at the same time, of course, being conscious that a lot more work still needs to be done. Globally, 25% of young women and 4% of young men were married before their 18th birthday. I think one of the previous presenters referred to the issue of men. While we know that there's a particular vulnerability around young girls in the way that they get married, in the way that they're selected to get married, I think it's also important to remember that young men, and particularly boys, are also survivors or victims of child marriage as well. And it's something that we need to keep in the forefront of our advocacy as we work in whichever context that we're in. Next slide, please. Now, COVID, last year, we faced such a huge impact in terms of the COVID pandemic. And within the UNICEF, and specifically within the context of the global program, we were able to do a number of assessments which give us a sense of what impact COVID has had on child marriage. We had a number of key stakeholders, especially at community level, giving us feedback and saying, despite all the efforts that we have in place, COVID is impacting on child marriage, but we didn't substantiate it. This year, I hope a number of you have seen that UNICEF has issued data to show that 10 million more additional cases of child marriage may occur by 2030 due to COVID. So the situation is such that young girls have already been affected in 2020, and we know that COVID is going to have a knock-on effect. And so it's not just an issue of what happened in 2020 coming into 2021, but as we go forward. I've heard one of the other presenters talk about, for example, the fact that schools are being closed. We know that the longer that girls are out of school, the less chance there is of them being able to go back into school. And when girls are not in school, it means that they're at a higher risk of gender-based violence within their households, of families making coping decisions that we have too many mouths to feed, as an example. So why don't we put up one of the girls to be able to get married? So there are a number of risks that girls face when they are not in school. And so for all of us in our advocacy, I was really happy to hear most of the presenters talk about the importance of getting girls back into school as quickly as possible. In addition to the 10 million additional cases of child marriage, we also know that 117 million children today are estimated to be at risk of being pushed into monetary poverty. At least 20 million girls today are also at a high risk of never returning to schools. And I think I've already made the point that if these girls don't go back to school, we also face a high risk of them being subjected to child marriage. Next slide, please. So the global program is a program, I think for most of the Zonta family, you're very familiar with it. It's being implemented in 12 global program countries, in South Asia, in West and Central Africa, in East and Southern Africa, and also within the Middle East. But the learnings that we have within the context of the global program are being shared over and above. And so what the green spots show you within this map is the countries where, we're targeting the ones in blue, but we're able to reach over and above to those ones who are in green as well. And I'd say even today, many, many more are learning from us in what we're doing within the context of the global program, but also we are learning from them as well about what is it that works within these different contexts and what is it that we're able to replicate in the specific target countries. Today, the countries which are in the blue being reached by the global program, it's over 300 million of the 650 million girls and women married in childhood globally. Next slide, please. The key strategies for the global program, many of you, if you've seen my presentations before, have seen this before, but it's always important to remind ourselves that, as to what is it that we're doing together with the Zonta family. Number one, we're creating and expanding opportunities for empowerment of adolescent girls. Two, we're promoting and supporting a gender equal environment. We're strengthening governance to prevent child marriage. We're enhancing the sustainability and impact of child marriage programs. And we continue to build partnerships such as those with, the Zonta family to ensure that we can be able to reach the elimination goal. Next slide, please. Now, COVID, hit us hard. We have those strategies which I've referred to, but we had to take those strategies and say, within the COVID environment, what does it mean? How do we adjust our programs? What does girl empowerment mean? For many of us pre-COVID, it meant, when you talk about girl empowerment, it meant, meeting up with girls after school for girls clubs, meeting up with girls on the weekend to talk about, who they are, what they want to do, their bodily integrity, etc., etc. But within the COVID situation, because of the containment measures, we know that we couldn't be able to bring girls together in the way that we had done before. So some of the things that we did, for example, was to harness digital solutions to maintain engagement with girls so that we can carry on to deliver the life skills, the health information, and even remote education. Practically, what do I mean? It means using phones, it means using radios, it means using televisions to ensure that we can still get the messages out to girls so they can be able to have the information to not find themselves in situations of child marriage. We also, after some time, were able to, once we got PPE in place, and PPE is protective equipment. So for example, masks. Once we were able to purchase that, we could be able to reconvene back with the girls in safe spaces, but in smaller numbers and at a reduced time for their safety. In terms of health and protection, we were able to maintain the essential health services, including sexual reproductive health services and supporting training of service deliveries, again through online modalities. So across the 12 countries, we were able to hold Zoom calls, we were able to use phones and send SMSs, WhatsApp, you name it, to be able to ensure that we stay in contact with service providers so that they can continue to provide the services that are required for adolescent girls and boys. We use child helplines and other online platforms to provide mental health and psychosocial support. I know many of the Zonta family members are actually practitioners out there, and they know that the mental impact that COVID had on young people, and especially young girls. We were able to use child helplines to continue to reach out to young people to create that space where they could not only talk to service providers around issues related to mental health, but also talk to other young people and stay connected. We were able to expand our partnerships with local civil society organizations. Again, I know many of you are aware that many governments in the world either came to a halt, and particularly the ministries that are responsible for issues to do with child marriage, due to contain measures, basically shut down. Within this situation, I think it was critical and it was wonderful to see, we're talking here about local civil society organizations, but for me, what I saw is a lot of local women coming to the fore, taking leadership, identifying where girls were at risk of being married, reporting it, and looking at how to be able to link up to service providers so that these girls could be protected even in a containment situation. We also remained committed to learning throughout this period of time because we wanted to understand we've never been in this type of situation. What does it mean for the life of an adolescent girl during a COVID situation? How has her life changed? We all know that schools have closed and she's now within a household. What does that mean for her? How does she feel about not engaging with her teachers? How does she feel about not engaging with other young people? What is happening with her and how can we be able to support and protect her within this environment? And again, even in this learning situation, we had to apply mobile technology. So we're using things like YouReport, which basically is phone technology where we can be able to engage with young people and find out what's going on in their lives and how we can be able to support them, irregardless of the challenge that we're facing during containment measures. Next slide, please. Here we have an example, of girls who, even during the COVID situation, were able to carry on. We know some of the challenges that young people faced was, for example, not being able to access products for menstrual health. And during this period of time, in a safe environment, you can see that the girls are all masked up. We were still able to find opportunities where we could be able to reach out and provide these girls with the services that they require in terms of their sexual and reproductive health. Next slide, please. The challenges that we continue to have, I think you've all heard me talking a lot about, the digital world, using of phones and TVs, etc. But as we go on and as we reflect and as we use the surveys to be able to learn, we're picking up a lot on challenges that girls are facing. Digitization has come out as a major solution. We're able to reach so many more young people and even adult communities at large countries, by sending off messages on TVs and radios and phones. But here's a challenge that we faced. Who actually has phones, TVs, and radios? It's not the most poorest members within our communities. In addition, in a household, who actually has the phone or has control over the phone? In many cases, you find it's the father, and he determines where and when and who can be able to access that. So the issues around the digital gender gap have really come to the fore, in addition to poverty. Not to mention even issues of people who are just in hard to reach areas where there's no connectivity, and so they cannot be able to access, the great information that we're pushing through digitalization. And so that's a challenge for us as we go forward, because we know in many of our countries, they're going through a second, and maybe we'll even go through a third wave of COVID. What does it mean in terms of being able to reach especially the most vulnerable within those type of environments? This is a challenge for us and something that we're continuously learning and looking at how to be able to address. Lack of learning and support networks. Many of us are, I think it's people describe us, so now we're being thrown left and right. We don't have time to stop and learn about what it is that works. And so I'm really grateful for platforms such as this, but through the Zonta family, where people are able to stop and be able to reflect about what it is that is, works, what we can be able to learn, as we go forward. Limitation to services. We did our best in terms of ensuring the services continue, but we know that there were challenges around services. Many services came to a stop. And when you look at specifically at sexual and reproductive health services, this is a big challenge because we know that early pregnancy is a big driver. And if young people don't have access to SRA child services, then that leaves them, possible to get into situations of child marriage. Final point that I just want to raise is, attention to child marriage was diverted during emergency. It was important during the situation of COVID for us to focus on COVID, to focus on getting masks, to focus on hand washing, and now to focus on vaccines. But what we also know at the same time that that's what's happening is that as young people, and particularly young girls, are in their households, they're also particularly vulnerable to many other things. So beyond COVID, how do we ensure, or within the situation of COVID, that we don't forget girls, that we're still conscious of them, and that we're still out there to be able to protect them? Next slide, please. I can see that we've gone way over time. So let me just say, and Teresa, please forgive me for that, that, we continue to do the hard work that we've done. We continue to be committed. We have some priorities which we've listed out here. Members are free to be able to reach out to any of us to ask about these. But it's what I want to be able to communicate is that we're in a situation of continuous flux, but we must remain determined. We have 8 years to 2030, and through partnership, we will be able to, to achieve the elimination goal. Thank you very much, Megan, and back to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Nakali. Thank you for all the tips on how we can improve further despite all the challenges. And you do bring out the challenge in the digital age, especially at the time of COVID, where emergency happens and nobody care much about what is really critical in the child marriage situation. Now, I think we end the fourth speaker session, but then there are some questions. May I just come up with 2 questions first, right? And one question is on the culture. People are very concerned, especially our audience. Several of them come up with this question of, as a culture, it's so difficult to break, right? Because it's a religion and so on and so forth. So how can this be done? Actually, Maria has actually come up with a few suggestions already, but I'm sure other speakers may want to say something about it, or even Maria, if you can elaborate further. Now, the second question is on the success that the US, especially Freddie, brought this up, the success in the US in changing or passing the law in the states, right, in the various states. So is there any success factor in lobbying the government to have this law changed? Right. So how about the first question, the culture? How are we going to address this, the difficulty and the challenges?
Okay, I'll take this forward if everyone permits. My suggestion would be, as we have been working towards it, what we do is, rather than the culture, it's the religious aspect that comes into as a hindrance in the way. So what we do is we keep a religious leader with us and we educate him about the law that is at place. And then we leave it up to the parties to listen to the religious leader, because at times it feels like they are more prone and more open to listen to the suggestions that are being given by them, rather than us, the lawyers, who are tainted to be the villains in the scene. So what we do is we take in the religious leaders, we train them, we educate them about the whole aspect as to what the repercussions are of early marriages, the mortality rate, about the problems, the physical problems that these girls face. And then we convey it to them, and then it is their responsibility to convey it within their society as to why this should not be taken forward. But then again, as I must also mention that this is something that has worked, but it has not always worked, because not all religious leaders are same. Religion is a thing that it has its own interpretation. But at times it did work, and I believe that if we all work towards it, then this is one thing that can be taken forward to curb the differences between the cultural, religious, and the legal difference that is there in place. Thank you. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Maria. This is very smart. Go for the religious leaders. If you face this problem and as they are leaders, then everybody will then follow. Very good tips. How about Nakali? Do you see any, in Africa and all the countries that you have worked with, besides poverty, is culture, religion, some of the hindrances?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Teresa. I mean, culture, religion, gender norms and our beliefs and norms is a big driver of child marriage. Fully agreed with Maria about, looking at who are the leaders within our communities. But one thing I'd like to be able to add on is young people themselves. We want to be in a situation where we transform communities, that we transform, nations. So the work that we're doing around empowering young girls, talking to them so that they grow up into being mothers who don't think that this is something that should happen to their daughters or their sons. I think there's a huge opportunity there for working with young people as well in order to transform for the future. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. How about the second question? And I am also, conscious of the time. How about the second question on the state law? How can we, both of you has been so successful in influencing the government or lobbying the government to pass the law in the states for the protection of children, right, who married before their legal age. So how about that, Freddie? Any tips? And Donna as well?
I'm sorry, just so I understand the question, tips about what?
On how do you lobby the government successfully so that you are able to change the law or ask the law to be passed?
Well, it's definitely not an easy task, and we've lost many more battles than we have won, which is why so far only 4 US states have ended all marriage before 18 without exceptions, while other states have watered down the legislation or shifted or reduced or changed child marriage or just rejected it altogether. But what we have found is helpful is, and that's the reason that the power of Zonta is so important here. It's grassroots support. Legislators want to do what their constituents tell them to do. And what we have found to be really effective is when we have groups like Zonta, and I know that there are some Zontians on the call here today who have been with me at one-on-one meetings with legislators where we schedule advocacy days, back-to-back meetings. We're doing those virtually now during COVID, back-to-back meetings with a group of us talk to a legislator directly and say, here is what we as your constituents want you to do. You need to end child marriage.
I would love the opportunity. Yeah, I would love the opportunity to piggyback off that too. I agree with everything that Freddie just said. I think additionally, elevating the voices of survivors is critical in this work as well. When you have survivors that are in a space where they are healthy, they are protected, and they can share their experiences, that really humanizes the situation and it tends to reach the legislators better. And then the other part of that, and this kind of I think goes back to the initial question regarding culture. I think this has ties with that as well. Here in the United States, especially in a lot of the more rural communities, there is this cultural mentality that is often tied to religion, especially Christianity, that says that, parents should have the right to be able to make decisions on behalf of their children, or if a child gets pregnant, then, they should automatically be married. And so anticipating that type of pushback and being able to articulate, let's really talk about what happens when a child has to get married when they're pregnant. For one thing, if we're really focused on preserving the family unit, we cannot ignore the statistic that over 80% of child marriages end in divorce. So we cannot possibly be positioning children for a role that they're just not ready for and put it under this guise of preserving the family unit. And then the second piece of that, again, going back to the pregnancy exception that some states have allowed, is that not only are you putting one child in harm's way by marrying them off if they're pregnant and potentially giving a predator the opportunity to hide behind a marriage license and continue to harm this child, you're putting a second child in harm's way as well, the pregnancy that came from that situation. And so that child would actually have more rights and more protections as unmarried than they would within a marriage, because at least then there would be some type of governmental oversight through Child Protective Services or other organizations. So again, anticipating what that pushback is going to be so that, as we're going in with these grassroots approaches and we're forming these coalitions, we're able to have these very robust and deep, meaningful conversations with legislators, and also elevating survivors' voices. critical for the initiative.
Thank you, Donna and Freddie. These are all tips in which all of our clubs who will be working on locally need to understand and to pursue. Megan, do we still have more questions from the floor?
I don't think so. I think they were all along those similar lines around culture and religion and how to deal with pushback, which Donna just, so eloquently addressed. So I think we've covered it.
Yes, thank you. So now we have this update view of end-child marriage efforts globally. And the pandemic has stalled us back. But I feel that with this webinar, even myself get very charged, right? We understand what's going on and we understand all the efforts, and we will be going away, taking all these ideas and be more committed, right, to how respective clubs work on the end-child marriage effort. Before we leave, I would like to give you a little dessert, and that is from the South America situation, a very short update from Adriana, who is a member of our advocacy committee. She would like to quickly update us on the end-child marriage and all the situation in South American countries. Adriana, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. My greetings to all who have joined. Well, in countries of South America's Zonta region, legislation allows marriage from the age of 16 in some countries or 18 in others. To marry younger, girls must have authorization from their parents or guardians, so the cases of legally child marriages are not extended. But it is a reality that principally in rural areas or in poor areas of large cities, the unions of girls and teenagers with older people occur and are taken as natural. They are not marriages, but informal unions. And it is not a culture issue, but a practice related to poverty and lack of access to education. According to the UNICEF report of 2019, 25% of women between the ages of 20 and 24 were married before reaching the age of majority in Latin America. And in Caribbean countries, the percentage is bigger. So these are important and disturbing numbers that will be surely increased with pandemic. We agree that these girls and teenagers are at risk due to the strong impact that their early motherhood has, the high risk due to intimate partner violence, and the consequences of dropping out of school. And these are all facts that prevent them from developing a life project. So we are proud of the important work that Zonta and other organizations are doing, but altogether we should advocate for more public policies and services that contribute to prevent and deal with this situation that is very dangerous for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. So now we are formally coming to an end, and I would like to thank Freddie, Donna, Nankali, and also Maria for your time in preparing all your speeches and all the facts to support this webinar. And a very big thank you to President Sharon. As I can see, President Sharon stay here until the end. And thank you. And all the audience, they consist not only just Zontians, but also some of our service partners. And this is the way in which we would hope that many of our partners, as Nakali pointed out, to have more partners to take this forward. And this is very important as an advocacy initiative for Zonta International. So thank you very, very much. And also my big thanks to Megan and Gina for supporting me, because it's not just this hour, but it's many months starting from the beginning where we plan. And if all of you find this webinar interesting, I hope you will join us on the next one because of summer holiday. So our next one will be on the 13th of September, and it is a study of women's role in climate change. So I hope I will see all of you, if not more people, registering for the next webinar. So thank you very much to all our speakers. And I think this is not an end. There may be also not problems, but questions, all right, where they would probably like to follow up. So we will be contacting you and see if you can help us as well through your experience and also your commitment, right, which has inspired us very much. So thank you very much, and good night, and then good morning. Have a nice day for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.